fat, let them just be morbidly obese.
When I see the Chumbawamba trying to squeeze down the aisle.
In other words, I believe that a bit of fat shaming goes quite a long way.
Do some good, call someone fat today. It works.
What was your trick? Everybody's been I was in a weight loss contest with this super fat comic named Burnt Chrysler.
Don't say anything, because then you'll hurt their feelings.
We asked people to fat shame us publicly.
They had a weight loss competition. Tom was like, dude, let me tell you something.
It actually works.
Fat shaming works.
Hello, what's happening, people? Welcome back to the podcast. Now, if I sound a wee bit irritable, that's because I've never done more research for a podcast in my life. Been reading studies, I've been watching YouTube videos, and I have been angering myself at some of the stupidity I hear when it comes to the subject of fat shaming. Now, this will be titled something to do with Joe Rogan. Maybe I'll thumbnail Piers Morgan a few times because he says some ridiculous stuff about fat shaming as well. But I didn't actually start with wanting to use them as clickbait, which, let's be honest, that's what I'm going to do with them. They're just the people that came up when it came to fat shaming. I was just like, fat shame is a topic I should probably talk about as a PT who works with mostly overweight people. And they were the people that kept coming up. Now, listening to Joe Rogan talk about anything to do with nutrition and exercise can be brutally painful. Brutally painful. But in particular, the fat shaming stuff. Now, it's 5 to 7 years old, some of it. I'm sure I have heard him speak about it more recently, but I can't be sure if he's changed his tune on it. I mean, the guy has over 2,000 podcasts, so if he's changed his tune, then my bad, and you can call me out for that. Anyway, before we get into the episode, I'm just going to explain how things are going to work, because I don't have a Jamie or a wee Dave like bringing stuff up on the screen, so I'm going to have to do that in the post-edit. I'm just going to play some clips that are about what I'm talking about in between. So if you hear some random guy's voice, it's probably going to be either Joe Rogan, Piers Morgan, maybe Katie Hopkins, but to be honest, I've not watched Katie Hopkins talk about fat shaming. I just know there's a video, but I couldn't possibly bring myself to click on it because I would have probably just bang my head against the table instead of listening to what she had to say, because it's always ridiculously dumb and it's only stuff that can keep her somehow on people's screens. I don't know how she's done it for so long. God help that woman. But yeah, and also there was one guest that was on Joe Rogan one time talking about fat shaming. To be fair to Joe, he did actually push back on him a few times, but what he was saying was painful gear. But yeah, that's how this is going to work, and then I'm going to tie it all up with some studies, also just my general thoughts, and then just interjections with like the videos from Joe Rogan's podcast, Piers Morgan's show, and then maybe just some extra bits from maybe random people if I can be bothered. Let's see how bothered I can be. But anyway, enjoy the show. If you're on Spotify, rate the podcast. If you're on YouTube, or don't, I can't be arsed. Enjoy. So here's just some clips from some of the things Joe Rogan had to say on fat shaming and his anecdotal experiences with his mates Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. Listen to this.
Yeah, no one's ever done it the way we're doing it, and no one's ever been as fat. We have these things to shield people from. We call it fat shaming. You know, don't tell someone they're fat. Let them just be morbidly obese and go through life at a massive risk of heart attack or stroke or diabetes. Don't say anything, because then you'll hurt their feelings. You could say something to someone, and it might be uncomfortable in the moment. Like, hey, Mike, listen, I don't want to be that guy, but you got to lose some weight. And then that guy could go and look in the mirror and go, fuck, I really do need to lose some weight. My friend Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer, they had a weight loss competition. One of the things they kept doing is fat shaming each other, like ruthlessly. And they would use hashtag Bert is fat, hashtag Tom is fat. And they fucking both lost a shitload of weight. I think they both lost between 50 and 60 pounds. That after it was over, Tom was like, dude, let me tell you something. Fat shaming works.
So I want to dissect this, right, because his anecdotal evidence, I'm not saying was wrong. I've not actually looked into like how much weight those two comedians lost, and I've not looked into the competition. I have done a lot of research in this podcast, but that I could not be fucked looking at. However, there's a massive difference, right, between you and your mates having a wee laugh with the incentive of a competition that was probably all over social media. So there's also that incentive to not disappoint yourself or not embarrass yourself on social media. Also, when he describes them fat shaming each other, it is done from, like, there's no denying it's done from a place of, like, it's done from a happy place. It's done from they're comedians, they're having a laugh. They know that it's not actually real, and they're not actually judging each other on each other's weight. Even if they are fat shaming them or calling each other fat, it's not remotely the same thing. It's absolutely not. And like Joe Rogan's like, dude, fat shaming works. Like, my buddies, Joe, are you really going to use a competition that you and your famous mates competed in, or just your famous mates competed in, for a laugh, really, as how society should feel about fat shaming? Fat shaming's a completely different thing. It's weight stigma. It's more, and it sometimes isn't someone calling someone fat. It can be as simple as someone making comments on someone's weight. Right now, I'm a personal trainer. I was very naive when I came into the industry, thinking that because I knew so much about food and nutrition, that I could somehow help everyone. And I think a lot of people that have came into this industry, or even just people that are dietitians, nutritionists, but personal trainers, have probably realised that they have been humbled. We might have, you could have the most knowledge in the world about even psychology, the actual food itself, how people could live the healthiest lifestyle possible, and then trying to get people to do that is a completely different story, and making them feel shamed for not being able to implement your amazing advice that you can do so easily does nothing but harm them in the future, or in the present as well. Now, he also had another guest on at one point, and I've never listened to this episode. I just listened to the clip whilst I was searching for fat shaming. His name was Milo, and I cannot pronounce his second name because it's some sort of Greek name, and I have a history of struggling with Greek names specifically, and anything with more than 4 syllables really with my accent is kind of a struggle for me. So I'll just play a clip while I...
But all you need to do if you want to lose 200 pounds is stop fucking eating, right? I got in huge trouble on Twitter for fat shaming someone at the gym, and I was like, no, this is disgusting. I don't want to have to look at this, right? Fat shaming works, right? And I was doing this person a favor. Look, this is how people get thin, worrying if it could be them next. Do some good, call someone fat today. It works. Don't believe these bullshit studies that come out. And that person in the gym, to your point about, you know, working out, that person in the gym doesn't need to be in the gym. He was like 350 pounds or something. The gym is worthless. Don't bother lifting anything.
That's not true.
No, it is. Get
no, exercise is a great way to lose weight.
No, it's not.
It's
not.
a great
no
way to
cardio.
lose weight.
Cardio is pointless. Cardio is a masochist way to lose weight. It is completely pointless.
Listen,
you can do some
that
work,
is not true. Cardio, it will elevate his metabolism.
This clip hurts a lot more. Even though Joe Rogan actually, like, corrects him a few times, he doesn't correct him. He argues with him, and he's also wrong about absolutely everything. I know I've played the clip, right, but I haven't also watched the clip back, because, like I said, I don't have a Jamie. But I think he said something back to him, like, cardio engages your metabolism, or like boost your something. It was something about metabolism, and it was just so dumb. And then he was also, I think he said, what was he said? Cutting out carbs and sugar makes people miraculously shrink. I told you about those 4 syllables. Miraculously. What was that? Miraculous. 5 syllables. Wow, that was a big one for my accent. The other guy, I know like Joe Rogan's going to have had some ridiculous guests on because he's done so many. And apparently in the comments, people like this other guy's work on his other topics. It sounds as if he's just one of those typical people that is going against every single social media movement. And by the way, there is a place for that, because most movements go too far. Like feminism, great movement, just turned into hating men. Same with like men have the same version, which is why Andrew Tate got so big, even though he clearly is just a massive misogynist. Nobody basically gets anywhere by being in the middle, which is probably where sane people are. So it's constant insanity on each side of the spectrum. That's probably how people like Joe Rogan and stuff get so big, or Piers Morgan, because they're willing to just be controversial. Joe Rogan not so much, but he lets his guests be quite controversial. But honestly, sometimes listening to Joe Rogan's podcast is a bit like hearing 2 of your uncles arguing about trans rights at Christmas, and you're just sitting there like, what evidence have you got to like substantiate your claims? You've pulled one random topic out your arse about how some trans athlete was a man and then converted to a woman and won some event in a random place in America. How many trans people do you know? The answer is 0. Why are we talking about trans people? I would like to have my dessert, please, instead of listening to you 2 morons arguing about trans rights without never meeting a trans person. And I feel like I fell into this trap with loads of podcasts like Joe Rogan, and try to think of other. No, it was mostly Joe Rogan, but I remember, like, I've went through a phase now where I've muted most of social media. I don't really consume short form content, and since doing that, I'm like, man, see when I go into a gender neutral toilet, I don't even take it in. I don't even, like, doesn't do anything harmful to me. Also, nobody has ever, like, forced me to correct their pronouns. That's never happened in real life. And it doesn't really seem to be that big an issue. These are just social media issues that don't really exist anywhere near as much as you would think they do if you just spent all your time in the house on social media. When you go out into the real world, there isn't really many like pink and blue haired trans people screaming about how you need to get their pronouns correct. So I don't actually believe it should be as fiercely debated as what it is. Now, I'm not saying I'm not choosing either side, but I remember one time I wrote a tweet about like, why is everyone arguing about gender neutral toilets when there's and I deliberately, like, I done it because I'd been listening to too much of that stuff. And even just like that topic itself, right, it's just a bit very, on social media you're just going to get mental folk on both sides arguing about stuff. And I remember going, right, I'm just going to stop kind of talking about that, because it doesn't, it just incites some sort of mental debate. But anyway, we're getting off topic. Yeah, that's what Joe Rogan said. He said that cardio elevates your metabolism. He also went on to say something ridiculous about how what was it he said again? I've got it here. Joe Rogan said, yeah, if you can't just not eat food because you go into famine mode, which I think he meant starvation mode, and even then starvation mode doesn't exist. But he makes a good point, right? Like, exercise should be alongside nutrition, and it's very difficult. Nutrition fixes, and it's very difficult to listen to two people that don't work with people in any sort of gym environment or food environment, helping them with their eating habits. It's very hard to listen, and they also don't understand the literature whatsoever. It's very hard to listen to two people argue about how people should lose weight when they don't have a clue themselves. But yeah, the Joe Rogan on fat shaming, it's like an egotistical thing with people. I'm not fat, so therefore I'm better than you, and I know everything, and you should do what I say. It's the same reason that I don't go up to people in the gym who are clearly new and correct their form, even though I know 100 times more than them about their form and I could help them there and then. The reason I don't help them is, as someone who wasn't confident in the gym and was overweight when they were younger, I think I maybe experienced about 20 times where people came up to me and corrected my form, and every single time it put me off going to the gym, and every single time I resented them for it. I didn't listen to a single thing they said. And also, most of these people, when I look back on what they were saying, were wrong. Because if you feel entitled to go up to someone and tell them they're doing something wrong, that comes from a place of insecurity, and it's usually your ego. So there's many times that you're wrong, which you're wrong and you made the other person feel bad. How is that helpful? It isn't. So the other big hitter on the YouTube first page of like fat shaming works was Piers Morgan. Of course, Piers Morgan is probably the first page on any topic that could get views. But Piers says some stupid things. He says some really dumb things. And again, he uses anecdotal experiences of his brothers and his sons fat shaming him. Again, they don't call him fat. They friendly banter him. And a son talking to their dad about losing weight is so different to a father talking to his very young children about how they're maybe overweight. That's a completely different thing, and it's something I'm going to go through that I experienced. But let's listen to some of what Piers Morgan had to say on fat shaming.
Is this whole notion of body positivity making the problem worse? I'm joined now by great British menu star Tom Kerridge, who famously lost 12 stone. How big were you at your biggest?
Oh, I was over 30 stone.
Mates of yours or family or viewers, whoever it may be, were people making comments to you that made you think, you know what, about your weight, about your size? Were people, was that part of it as well?
No, none of it. It was all self-conscious. So the thing about anything that you have to do, whether it's losing weight, whether it's an issue with addiction, whether it's giving up smoking, whether it's alcohol, whether it's gambling, whatever it is, whatever it's part of your life, none of us are stupid. We all know it's bad for you. If you eat loads of Mars bars every day, you know you're going to be in a bad space. If you drink too much, it's about self-responsibility.
My point is, does fat shaming, if you know, when I put on a bit too much timber, I can absolutely rely on one of my sons who are all pretty fit, or my brothers who are not as fit actually, but like to dig it out. What the first thing they'll do is say, "God, you put some timber on, right?" And that will always make me go back to the gym. In other words, I believe that a bit of fat shaming goes quite a long way in making you think, actually, really? Okay, I better do something about it.
Now, listen, I know I'm talking about Piers Morgan being controversial and using various topics just to stay relevant and get views, and obviously, hey, I'm doing the same thing. I'm talking about Piers Morgan to try to become relevant and get some listens to the podcast. However, I do think these topics are so important that I'm going to use his name, and I feel like that's what YouTube is. I've looked at YouTube for a while and I know you might be listening to this on Spotify, but I've watched YouTube for a while. I'm like, why do these YouTubers just talk about other YouTubers? And I'm like, because that's the only way you can really get people to your channel in the beginning anyway. But Piers, you can tell, has this agenda when he has this guy on. He's the chef. I've wrote his name down here. I'm going to just stop pretending that I'm not trying to talk about things whilst reading the notes I have, because I've got too many and I don't want to get them wrong. So the chef's name was Tom Kerridge. I hope I pronounced that right. And he was a chef. Apparently lost a lot of weight. Again, I didn't really look into him, but I really liked him in the clip. And you can tell Piers has an agenda, that he wants to get a story out this guy that fat shaming is why this guy lost a lot of weight. And he straight away kind of shuts down that idea. And also there was a story about James Smith going on this morning, and he said this morning wanted James Smith to fat shame Piers Morgan, and that was the whole agenda they had. And you know what the media are like? They're desperate. They'll do anything. Anything that could, even in the opposite interest of the public. They don't want to do the public a service. They want the public to watch them to the cost of themselves. They don't care. They don't give a shit about you or me. And that's not news, I don't think. I think we're all aware of that. Anyway, he's like asking him, right, did you get, like, he's insinuating, did you get fat shamed for this to happen? And the chef was amazing, and he brought up so many good points. Socio-economic factors, poverty factors. When someone is overweight, this idea that they are fat, this idea that they're fat because they're lazy or they've no willpower and it's their fault, it's their responsibility, they're this burden on the health service, they're costing the government so much money. All of this plays into weight stigma, and it's a massive problem in the country. And I'm not saying, look, that we're somehow going to make everyone not judge someone who's overweight. That's obviously an idealization that just isn't going to come to fruition. That's just living in dreamland, and to be honest, that would probably have its own consequences if nothing was ever to be allowed. Nothing was allowed to be said about anything. I've never lived in that world, and none of us have, but obviously that would have some sort of consequence as well. However, he raises all the good points and stuff that I sort of experienced when I was young and growing up, and my mum was severely depressed, pretty sure schizophrenic and all that. Now, I've went through a lot of this on my podcast. I was eating whatever I was given, and whatever I was given was whatever we could afford, which would be like packets of pasta and sauce, the really processed packets of pasta. It would be chips and chicken dippers. My mum had really bad rheumatoid arthritis as well, so I'd be cooking for myself a lot or just making my own food. It would be 2 bowls of humongous amounts of cereal and milk. I'm like 9, 10, 11, 12. At the age of like 7 or 8, I'm gaining weight. Are you going to tell me at 10 that I need to take responsibility for my weight gain and I'm fat and lazy? I would argue that would have made me fatter. And why do I come to that conclusion? Because I played football 3 times a week, all throughout my childhood. And from the ages of 6 to about 18, I was a junkie monkey. I was heavier between like 12 and 15. I rampantly gained weight from those ages, and then it calmed down. But it was at the forefront of my mind all those years. I would say it was 80 to 90% of my thoughts. I was aware I was overweight, and I was trying to change it, but I was overwhelmed. You know, living in a single parent household with someone who I don't want to go into this too much, but she gaslit me quite a lot, and I don't think she's a bad person for it. I think she was even more gaslit, if that's the right way to phrase that, by her mother. So she had just never got over that, and then imprinted her experiences onto me, probably unwillingly, but she couldn't stop it. So you're in a situation there, and many other people are in situations like this where you can say it's someone's fault, but unless you know what that person's situation is, you can't really comment, because anyone that told me, anyone that would be like, it was your fault, you were fat, and I was only ever like overweight up until I was about 18, I'd be like, okay, you're going to go around and tell all children it's their fault, they're overweight, when they're literally a child. That's decisions are mostly made by their parents and their teachers and their environment. Okay, and then once you become overweight or obese, the longer you are overweight or obese, the more and more health implications that can arise, can make it harder to lose weight after that. So it's getting more and more complicated, and simple sayings like fat shaming works are just completely moronic. And it's something you would hear your uncle say at Christmas. Your uncle that has never left his hometown and, you know, thinks COVID was a hoax. You know, that's what you're up against when we're talking about things like that. So because I haven't really struggled with my body, with my relationship with my body, for maybe well, you always have little struggles. I still feel like I hold more fat tissue around my chesticles and I have a wee bit of man boobies, but I always struggled with the thought that I have more rolls and stuff. So even when I lost weight, I had a wee struggles, right? But never to the extent I did through my childhood and maybe up until I was about 21. So when I recall stuff like this, it's actually quite hard for me to fully remember, but I think it's so important I do, because I'm in a rare position where I can tell you how someone who's lost weight and kept it off can look down on people without meaning it, who maybe haven't achieved the same things, but then have self-awareness that that is part of the ego and part of being a human, right? So let's maybe go back to my dad fat shaming me, right? My dad is he's unreal. I'm one of those stupid, annoying sons who would have put their dad on a pedestal. I would have talked to him about my dad all the time when I was a kid. I'd be like, he's amazing, he's the best dad in the world. He would do anything for me, and I always say, if I didn't have my dad with my mum's issues, I would be terrified to, my dad was the voice of reason, also sometimes the voice of an absolute nut job, but his love for me always shown, and he always came at things from a place of love, even though just sometimes it was a bit the way he done things. But his upbringing was two alcoholic parents and a lot of abuse in terms of my grandpa to my gran. So how he managed to do that is sensational. I've never said the word sensational. But so when I was overweight, my dad was always pushing me to play football, which I think was a good thing. And because I was decent at football, I wasn't going to make it, right? I'm not one of those guys that says I had this injury and then I wasn't going to make it. I was just decent. If I was playing in a team, I'd be one of the best 2 or 3 players. Well, when I lost weight anyway. But I was nowhere near making it, okay? Right, I'm not claiming to have made it, but he was he's good, but he's overweight. He could be really good if he wasn't overweight. That's the thought process my dad had. But I was getting heavier and heavier towards 14 or 15. And also that's when you start liking women. You know, that's when you start oh, the ladies. And you start, thinking about those sort of things. And also that's when your insecurities come through, because you're oh shit, I don't know what to do with this species, and I'm also overweight. So I remember in school, I had all sorts of tactics to try cover up how heavy I was. And this is like the shame that you start building, and I would have always had, but like you would do this thing, and I still do this sometimes. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling my top out. If you're listening, right, I would just like keep pulling my top out to try cover up like my rolls. I was very self-conscious when I sat down, especially just 'cause I'd feel like I would have rolls. I remember swimming being one of the most traumatic experiences possible, because it was the first that, like, you were literally getting lined up down, it was Hamilton Water Palace we were going to, right? And you would line up, and it'd be the first time, like, girls would see you with your top off. I don't ever remember that happening before that. We're like between 13 and 15 doing swimming lessons. And I can remember in the changing rooms, like, almost shaking at the thought of, like, because I was really heavy at that point. I was like 100 kilos when I was 15. And you can see that you're getting judged. Even though us personal trainers love to harp on about no one's judging you in the gym, when you're 14, you're in the top 3 heaviest people, and the 30, 50 people you have at the swimming, you're getting judged. The teacher was judging me because he was an arsehole. The boys and the girls were judging you, and it was humiliating. And I was shite at swimming because I was too heavy, and I felt like a hippo trying to swim. So you start building up this shame. You start blaming yourself for everything. You're like, why am I like this? What's wrong with me? I remember that was the main thought, because I had no education around food, and I was told that it was under my control, and I would try do ridiculous things to lose weight. Trust me, anyone that says that people who are overweight don't try, most people who are overweight have tried to lose weight. And I'm not saying it's not possible, because I've had loads and loads of clients lose weight and keep it off. However, it's more complicated than what people who have never ever worked with people helping them to do so think, because there's so many other obstacles. A lot of them are up here, but just saying random things doesn't help people's integrated belief systems change, like about how it is their fault that they're overweight, and there's nothing they can do about it, because those belief systems have came in place from them being overweight for so long, and also from them probably trying things to change that and it not working. So that's why they hold those belief systems, and you think, oh, it's so simple, you just eat in a calorie deficit, eat less, move more. People then go try those things. It doesn't work because they've maybe had some mental obstacles or life obstacles, and they then believe that it doesn't work and that there's something wrong with them, which isn't that much of a ridiculous conclusion to come to when everyone else seems to be making it so simple. But anyway, back onto my dad sort of fat shaming me. So he would get me to, and fat shaming, I believe, doesn't have to be you calling someone fat or heavy or a derogatory term. My dad's thing was forcing me to run, and not forcing me like fucking whipping me or something. Just, me and my cousin who had struggled with her weight as well, he would just take us on a run on like a Sunday, and it'd be a 2 or 3 mile run, and I don't ever remember agreeing to do it, and it was awful. It was honestly horrendous. I remember one of the things I was most self-conscious about was when I ran, my man boobs would bounce, and I would obviously avoid running for that reason. But when I would run round, it was a place called Drumpellier Lock, which is a lock near where my dad's from, and 2 times it happened. A group of like 3 guys, well, not guys, they would be maybe a year or 2 older than me, literally pissed themselves laughing at me running round, and were shouting fat boy at me. And I think that at that point that's when I stopped doing it with my dad, because I would literally just start crying, or I would just be like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. But he'd forced me to do it before. And he didn't really do this often, but I do remember him commenting on my weight like 2 or 3 times. I think maybe just more mocking me. Like, oh, nah, you've put on the pounds. Or, oh, you don't need another dessert or something like that. Do you know what I mean? He never actually went, you're fat. But he had a few of those at me. And it felt horrendous, especially coming from your dad. And again, I cannot say this enough. My dad is the best person in the world. He's the only person I talk to in my family. I've moved out about a month ago, and I've not went a week without seeing him. I speak to him every second or third day. I've lived away in Australia for 2 or 3 years, and I didn't go a week without being on the phone to him. He's a fucking class cunt. That's the way I would describe him. But even those wee tiny comments, guess what I would do whenever these sort of things would happen? Take a wild guess at how I coped with my emotions in these situations. Oh, you guessed it. I turned to food. Kit Kats, cereal, not so much takeaway because I didn't have the money for it, but pretty much anything that was in the cupboards, I would turn to. I wasn't old enough to drink. How do you think these sort of things happen? How do you think people end up turning to coping mechanisms? And food is the most readily available coping mechanism that we can all have access to, because it's more available than drink. Not everyone has drink in the house. Also, drink will change your state. Food won't. So some people are not going to turn to drink. And we all have access, like, well, not everyone obviously, but most of us have access to highly palatable, high in calorie food that can de-stress us a little bit, give us a little spike in dopamine, get us to stop thinking about whatever stressor we've had. So anytime I got fat shamed, it did nothing, not one single thing to make me eat better or change my nutrition habits. By the way, all in which I was trying to do all the time. I was always trying to lose weight. I'd done that stupid insanity thing, because we got made to do that in school once, by the way, when we were 14. What a ridiculous fucking thing that was. And then my managers were trying to make me lose weight. I had to run it more than everyone else. Again, that made me feel horrendous, because I would have to run more than the rest of the team, and the full team would watch me. How's that helpful? All it done was embarrass the fuck out of me, make me turn to food. None of these, it's such backwards thinking, and it comes from an egotistical place that, oh, I have done this, therefore they just need to do what I done, and then it'll work. There's so much more to gaining weight than just eat less and move more. A lot of it's emotional, and even just pointing that out isn't enough. It takes a long time for me to kind of really build a picture of, if I've got clients that are overweight, to really build a picture of what actually happened in their life. And I'm not just sitting them down straight away and go, yeah, what was your relationship with your mum and dad like? I'm not a therapist. But the story comes out over time, and you realise, oh, thank fuck I never just told this person here just eating a calorie deficit and go to the gym 3 times a week, because that shit would have put them off. Yeah, that was just my wee anecdotal experience of how fat shaming didn't work. But let's get into some more juicy topics about why is obesity actually rising, and would us just pointing out each other's flaws and each other's maybe weight gain, would that just make us all lose weight?
You cannot, in America, go to a gym store, and by gym store I mean anywhere that sells sporting gear. The only model you'll see is one that is this big. And it pisses me off because I no longer know what it might look like on me. It's being modelled on what is effectively a small family-sized car. The fear of fat people on planes.
What are you scared of?
Them being near me. And then there's always this arm, and I've worn someone's lap before. So you have to have their thigh on you. When I see the Chumbawamba trying to squeeze down the aisle, and it's like, and then they have to go sideways a bit, and then they have to lift the gunt over this chair to get in.
People who are overweight aren't lazy with no willpower. Now, I touched on before that I'm in a unique position where when I lost weight and kept it off and improved my relationship with my body, that I became self-aware that I had a natural incline to judge people that couldn't do it for themselves until I started working with them. So most people won't talk about this, but this is why personal trainers get so frustrated at their clients or tell them they just don't want it enough, etc. But I've noticed this feeling coming up more and more, and then actually deeper into it. It comes from insecurity in the person who's judging the other person. So like a lot of my insecurities of am I a good coach would inflict how I felt about a client not losing weight, because I would then be like, well, I'm a good coach, why aren't they losing weight? It's because they just don't want it as much as I did. And I've become very aware of those thoughts. But that's when you watch all of these videos, right? Piers Morgan, Katie Hopkins can't comment on anything. I've never seen her struggle with her weight. But Joe Rogan loves to like talk about how he gets up so early and does this cold water therapy and does these intense workouts and does keto but doesn't actually do keto because he talks about eating carbs and he doesn't even need to do keto anyway. Like they love to just talk about how good they are. It comes from an insecure place. It's like when another thing I would compare it to is you hear a lot of bodybuilders, right? Now, bodybuilding is a sport that is bred off of insecurity. Now, I know that's a wild claim to make, and bodybuilders will get so angry about that, right? But I can't really, I'm sure there is, but off the top of my head, I can't really think of another sport that like comes from a more insecure place. Like bodybuilding is literally the epitome of insecurities. But when you hear, like, so there was Phil Heath, I heard him before, he loves to rant about how he took less gear than everyone else. One, where's your proof in that? And two, you took a shit ton of gear. What is your point? Like, what is actually your point? But this is what, I don't know if it's just me that can see it, but I'll hear people ranting about fat shaming and how it works and how they just need to do X, Y, and Z and it's so easy and eat less and move more. Just avoid food, you fat prick, and all of this sort of stuff. Or you're fat and you're disgusting. All you need to do is avoid food. Society will be better. You'll be less of a burden on the government. Tax will cost less. And it all becomes about them, and how good they are. And it's just minging to listen to. It's so self-centered. I don't like the words like privilege and all that, because I wouldn't describe myself really as woke. With fat shaming, I've just had a personal experience and a lot of experience with actually working with people who would really, really struggle with being a victim of someone fat shaming them. So I have a completely different outlook to most of those people. But I've felt those same feelings with, like, I want to be validated for how hard I've worked, right? So if someone tells me I'm lucky with my business, I'll be like, fuck you. I've worked so hard. I've worked so much harder than you. But that's the same feeling, right? And I'm constantly trying to be like, right, let's be honest, I'm quite lucky. I am a man, I do come from a council estate, right, which I could use as an X Factor story. Oh, single, depressed, schizophrenic parent, brought up in benefits, lived in council estates. Like, I could go, but I don't want to go down that route because it's just, that gives me the fucking fear. But I'm lucky. Like, I'm so lucky that I did have one good parent, even though he did mention my boobies one time. I'm quite lucky I had a stable parent that was always there. I'm quite lucky that maybe when I lost weight, I'm half decent looking. I don't want to comment on that, but if you want to comment on that, I've heard through the grapevine, the odd person says I'm quite good looking. I don't know, maybe I am. Okay, well, this is going down the wrong route for me trying to say we need to be aware of where he goes. But people who have managed to not struggle so much with their weight are lucky. If you've had the money growing up to be able to eat healthier, make healthier choice, because it costs more money to buy fruit and veg, to buy unprocessed foods. It just costs more money. You're in the privileged position that maybe your parents did educate you a lot better than mine on the right foods to eat, because I forgot to mention, my dad was also telling me wild stuff about how I had to stop eating after 6. Carbs were terrible for me. Bread was an absolute atrocity and would kill me if you believed my dad. So I had no chance at not being overweight as a kid. On top of like how emotionally drained I was from constantly wanting to lose weight, I had absolutely no chance. Not a single chance. And if you've been someone that has also been pushed into sport by your parents, that's one of the lucky things I had. I was always quite active, really struggled with my weight, but I was always doing something, playing tennis, playing football. Even though I hated the running, I did actually on my own go into like cross country. I was terrible, came like third last every time. One time I convinced myself that I had to have loads of carbs before I had done the race, so I ate a shit ton of and I mean like 300 grams of plain pasta when I was about 13 before a run. And I was about 4 stone overweight, and I was cross country race when we were about 14 in Calder Glen in East Kilbride, and I ate 300 grams of pasta because I somehow convinced myself that would make me faster, fitter and less heavy on the run. And I was sick. I was sick everywhere halfway through the race, and I finished at least in the last 5. But yeah, like, you're lucky. If you've never struggled with your weight, you're lucky. Some of it's luck. Same if you get in a really healthy relationship and you've never experienced a toxic one, and your mum and dad loved you from the moment you were born. You're lucky. That's luck. You maybe don't want to hear it. Your ego doesn't want to hear it. But a lot of these good things that happen to us, or these good outcomes we have, so much of it is luck. Where were you born? If you're listening to this podcast, like, I was born in a very like difficult situation in terms of being on benefits and like not having a lot of money, etc. But I wasn't born in Africa, and I'm white, and I have plenty. I could have went to uni for free in Scotland. I never, because I couldn't concentrate for the life of me after the age of 11. But you're lucky. And don't be so fucking ignorant to think that you aren't, and that you are somehow this better person than someone who struggles with their weight, because you don't.
Obesity rates, we know, are just going through the roof all around Europe, actually, but particularly in this country, where it's shocking. And America. I see people, for example, I remember a while ago, a model in America, she was a plus-size model called Tess Holliday. She appeared on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine. It was over 300 pounds. There wasn't a single word in the whole piece which did anything other than celebrate her supposed body positivity. I felt that was incredibly harmful in terms of making people think this is actually a positive thing. That's morbid obesity.
Why fat shaming doesn't work? Why are people becoming heavier? Why is obesity rising? Now, I'm no expert in this field, but I don't think I'd be that far off to say that the introduction of ultra-processed foods has a massive part to play on it. Now, that wouldn't be the fault of individuals. That would be the fault of major companies trying to get higher profit margins by processing food even more, so there's less nutrition in it, but so they can make more money. So obesity has been on the rise from the 70s now. I love a bit of boomer slander. I love maybe slandering the boomer generation quite a lot. But these are the sort of typical boomer accusations about why we're getting heavier, even though that generation are also getting heavier. Obesity is not really discriminating between age groups. We're all age groups are becoming heavier. And I haven't even, I'll be honest with you, I haven't even read a study on that. I may be wrong, but I don't think I am. But they'll love to say stuff like, this generation is getting lazier, this generation is just always on social media, yada, 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 and how they had it harder than us. But obesity has been rising well before social media came out. It's been rising since the 70s. I would say, like, America is probably the most obese nation. Actually, when you've looked at, like, when I've looked at, because I've looked at obesity statistics before, there's lots of random countries that are in the top 10 obese countries in the world. But like, if you looked at how the amount of obese people in one place, I would say America is probably the highest. In America, we're the first people to introduce ultra-processed foods, pretty sure. So the fact we start blaming the individuals is just a complete disconnect in society. It's humans' egos overriding what is actually happening. Now, I often get asked, do I think personal trainers, or not, I don't often get asked, I got asked one time and the question has stuck with me for ages, do I think personal trainers can lower rates of obesity, like if there's loads of them, if we get more and more better personal trainers? And my answer has always been absolutely not, because we are working against consumerism, we're working against capitalism. These are all political movements that personal trainers can't change. I can't change what government's in charge. I can't change what policies they put through. And even then, I'm also not sure if I could implement the policies, what policies would actually work, because we've never faced this problem with obesity. And how do you stop people being able to access really ultra-processed foods? Could you do something with, because basically if you look at the rates of obesity, it's higher in the places of poverty. So there is, to people that are more economically advantaged, is that even a word? Sometimes I try to sound smarter than what I am. I'm aware of that, by the way. I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, but I'm alright. I'm sharpish. But, like, people with less money have to go towards ultra-processed foods because it's cheaper and they can't always afford the higher quality food. And the idea that it's just a calorie deficit, if you eat lesser quality foods and that's the majority of your diet, it's going to be much harder to control your calorie intake. So therefore, it's not a wild hypothesis to think that a household with less money is probably going to buy cheaper food, which is probably going to be less nutritious, which is probably going to lead to them consuming more calories. So again, luck. Are you just going to be like, well, I just make more money? Listen, your parents were skint, your grandparents were skint, and your great-grandparents were completely skint. Now, your parents, all they need to do is get more money, and then obesity will be eradicated. It's a very complicated issue. So again, you're lucky if you've never had to go through any of that. And even if you have had to go through all that and you've came out and you've never been overweight, you might be genetically more advantaged. Again, advantage, that word, I just don't think it works, so I'm going to stop using it. But you might have superior genetics, and I don't want to play this victim card or just appeal to people that are in that situation where they do want to blame everything else. People can change. However, I'm just sort of done with the narrative that just educating people and telling people that they just need to take responsibility themselves. I think you can help a lot of people, like as in me, as a coach, I can help a lot of people one-on-one by doing that method. However, like just pushing that message as something that will lower rates of obesity in like the UK and America, that's a dream. That's living in dreamland. Again, is the problem's much deeper. I don't like politics. I don't like talking about politics. I understand a lot of the literature on obesity. I understand nutrition. I understand the gym. I understand weight loss. I do not understand policies. I do not understand politics. I do not want to get involved in politics. But the problem lies with how we are going as a society and how we've been going for a long, long time. It's not the problem. Like, what, are people just getting lazier and have less willpower? Is that honestly your conclusion? People are getting dumber and lazier and are just eating more? I don't think so. I think it's maybe a cultural problem. It's maybe problems that maybe Big Foodie and, you know, these sort of guys have created, and now they've got us in a pickle and nobody really knows how to fix it. And probably, even if they did, they're making too much money probably to fix it. And certainly people like personal trainers, they can make an impact on their individual clients and maybe the people they work with and are closely connected to. But the likes of me, for instance, when I was overweight as a kid, seeing a wee YouTube video of a personal trainer educating people on what to eat and what to do with exercise, that wasn't stopping me from being overweight. My environment was why I was overweight, which wasn't just my mum's fault or whatever. It was also, you know, politics.
The only serious study that says that fat shaming doesn't work is from University College London, and it is hopelessly flawed. It deals with a tiny group of like 50-year-olds and upwards, and that's not what this is directed. That's not what the messaging is directed.
So I do come bearing some studies. Now, if anyone wants to enlighten me on some studies that show how fat shaming does work, then please be so kind and do so. But I honestly couldn't find any. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I hold my hands up. I'm not talented enough to memorize all these studies and read them with say them out without reading them. So I'm going to look at my phone quite a lot. So the main sort of studies, because I've just heard a lot of things from books and stuff in the past. So I was trying to like find stuff I've heard from years ago, as well as find some new things as well. And also, every time I was looking for like pro fat shaming, I was honestly just someone who is desperate for views and using anecdotal evidence, which is usually more sort of their friend bantered them a wee bit about being overweight, or what I would say is they maybe got like I get called fat in school sometimes, and I could easily go, I get fat shamed in school, and now I'm not fat. The fat shaming worked. Actually, the fat shaming made me feel horrendous every single time and made me turn to food every single time, and I lost weight in spite of that. Actually, that was probably one of my biggest obstacles. But I could tell you that I got fat shamed and I lost weight, therefore fat shaming works. So the main studies that I was sort of looking for was, I remember reading something about how weight loss treatments were less effective in kids who had, or not kids, sorry, adults who had suffered from sexual abuse, usually in their childhood. Also, I think it was relating to women who had potentially been raped. And I think one of the studies, that wasn't what they were trying to study. They were just trying to study weight loss. And then that came about when they then interviewed them after. I couldn't really find that one. I think that was part of Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections. But it then led me down a path of looking how childhood trauma affected obesity. Also, there was one that was really good, and I'm gonna put all these in the show notes on Spotify and in the YouTube description, and you can go and read them for yourself. So I'm not gonna like pick apart the graphs and put them on the screen and stuff. Not smart enough to do that, don't have enough time, and quite frankly I can't be arsed. If you still want to disagree with me, that's fine, but please come up with some sort of relevant argument. So the main one that is probably the best to see, let me bring it up. So this was a study called The Impact of Weight Stigma on Caloric Consumption. Overweight women who watched this stigmatizing video ate more than 3 times as many calories as overweight women who watched the neutral video. So basically they took 2 sets of women, one watched a neutral video, one watched a weight stigmatizing video. I'm presuming that's just someone getting called fat or something along those lines. Again, I'm not sure if these, I wouldn't call this a perfect study. It's just like, I'm just highlighting a few points to make people think differently. I'm not saying this study changes the game for anyone or like the whole world. Do you know what? I'm not actually that guy. I have no book to sell you. I have no course to sell you. I don't, like, every now and then I take on some clients. I'm mostly fully booked. This podcast cost me between £500 to £1,000 a month. I don't make anything from it. Yeah, I get clients from it, so you can say I do make money from it. But basically I'm saying, honestly, my agenda is just to help people. You might think, you're full of shit, everyone's got an agenda, but go and find mine. Like, I don't have something to charge you with, and there's no ads or anything on my, or like sponsors or anything to the podcast, because I don't want any, because they'd make me say stuff I don't want to say. But anyway, the overweight women who watched the stigmatizing video ate 300 calories more versus the ones who watched the neutral video ate 89 calories more, and significantly more calories than the normal weight individuals who watched either the stigmatizing video or the neutral video. So you get two groups that are overweight. One watches the neutral video, they still eat a little bit more, and one watches the stigmatizing video, they eat way more. And then the ones who aren't overweight watch both videos and aren't really affected, because not too hard to understand that the ones that aren't overweight don't really get triggered by weight stigma or being fat shamed, because they wouldn't feel shameful about being fat because they aren't fat. Another study that we'll look at, the association between childhood sexual and physical abuse with incident adult severe obesity across 13 years of national longitudinal study of adolescent health. Now, they were basically just trying to see if there's any connections between adverse childhood experiences like sexual abuse, physical abuse, or both. Now, they said there is evidence that childhood psychological trauma is associated with obesity. Small cross-sectional studies suggest childhood trauma is also associated with severe obesity and weight-related behaviours, including less success in weight loss treatment, perhaps due to psychobiological consequences such as elevated cortisol, disordered eating, food addiction, or maintaining excess weight to ward off romantic interest. Now, like I said, I couldn't really find that study that was based off of finding out that a lot of people that struggled with their weight, particularly women who were severely obese, a lot of them had been sexually abused in the study I remember hearing about in a book. So again, if I can't find this study and you can't find it, then you can disregard what I'm saying, but it might still make you think differently. But they found out a lot of the people that they'd made lose a lot of weight through a starvation sort of diet, I think, where there was really low calories, they looked back on the ones who had gained a lot of weight, and when they dug deeper with psychologists or counsellors, a lot of those women were victims of some sort of sexual abuse, whether it was rape or child sexual abuse, and it was the fat they felt protected them from men looking at them. So it just gives you a little indicator into how obesity can be much, much, much more complicated than these people just need to eat less and move more. And now I'm well out my comfort zone talking about those topics, and even like as a personal trainer, right, as you start to speak to people and they do just often tell you your stories, you do come into situations sometimes where you're like, I can't talk about this, I'd love to help you, but like that's too complicated for me, but like I'm sorry to hear that and stuff like that. But if you've never heard like evidence like that, or you've never heard even those sort of possibilities, that's down to being uneducated. And I really do, from every person I've heard speak about fat shaming, there's no way these people have looked at what any sort of evidence suggests whatsoever, or worked with people who are in these scenarios. And it really does just come from their own ego that fat shaming works. I can't see any other scenario, because I really don't see anywhere where it works, like unless it comes from a more of a loving sort of place where it's like, oh, you called your friend fat, but they knew you weren't actually calling them fat, and it was all a bit of a laugh. And even then, with that, like if you look at the situation where it was Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer doing a weight loss competition, was it more of the incentive of the competition? Because competition works. I would say it was more that than the fat shaming, especially because they made it public. And also, it wasn't fat shaming, it's friendly banter. Not the same thing whatsoever. Also, when you look at those studies, especially when it's talking about adverse childhood experiences, I've had therapists on the podcast, I've went for therapy myself, how people deal with traumatic situations. People can go permanently into like either fight, flight or freeze. I've had clients that I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're in what I would call freeze and they just can't get to the gym, and I don't have the experience to, and even like a really qualified therapist, they would need to be really talented to really pull some clients I've had through those situations. But certainly me just going here, even if I just went here, you're in freeze. Yeah, you're in freeze. You've probably had something happen to you in your childhood. So now that you know that, why don't you just not do it? Doesn't work. I haven't done it, but I can tell you it doesn't work. So it's just so much more complicated. Obesity is fucking complicated, mate. Mental health is fucking complicated, mate. Sure, everyone can diagnose themselves now if they go on Google, but it's way more complicated. They don't honestly. Wait till you hear what the experts are saying in like 20, 30 years time about how misunderstood mental health conditions were, how misunderstood people were about how to actually fix obesity. Because what was the stat? I can't remember the stat, but it's something like, and I'm going to butcher this, right? So don't take this one seriously. But when we done a podcast on how we would lower the rates of obesity, and disclaimer, didn't have the answer. It was more as just like awareness and like hypothesizing about potential things that could maybe work. But again, we're not politicians, and it's mostly going to do with policies to do with politics. But I think it's something like in the last 20 or 30 years, at least European countries anyway, no country has actually lowered the rates of obesity yet. And I think maybe one or two countries had flatlined it for a few years. That's the best outcome so far, as a few countries had flatlined the rates of obesity. Not one country has lowered rates in obesity. Again, I could be wrong with that. So if you want to fact check me, be my guest. So yeah, a bit of a fucking mental podcast, that one, on my own. Usually I just have a wee bit of a topic and go fucking ham and talk absolute shite. I've done a lot of research. I know I butchered a lot of things. I butchered the life out of them. But I feel quite passionate about fat shaming. I think it's a fucking ridiculous notion that it helps people. I think it's absolutely ludicrous that people that have platforms, like, I'm fine with your uncle thinking fat shaming works because he's a moron, right? But I'm not fine with people like Piers Morgan and Joe Rogan being so fucking dumb that they think fat shaming works without actually working with anyone ever and being able to see how ridiculous that is. It's so stupid. One of the most moronic sort of opinions that people have out there is that fat shaming works. Silly people. Dumb. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'll have edited it in post to try make it sound a wee bit less rambly so that there's little interjections with the actual quotes from the videos. So I hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you on the next one.